Hello guys, and welcome to my Nightcrow's tier list. So I know this is probably one of the more in-demand questions when it comes to our chat and stream, is a lot of people are still kind of struggling what classes they want to main, and hopefully this helps shed some light. Just know that this is a very subjective tier list, just based on my own game knowledge. Some people may disagree. We can have a discussion about it. Alright, here we go. So to start off with, we have Sword and Shield. So Sword and Shield, I would probably have to put it, and this is like an overall tier list, by the way. I'm gonna have to put like Sword and Shield maybe C. It's like in between C tier and B tier. I would put it in B tier just because it has that utility in PvP at the very least. It does have really good sustain and when it comes to grinding, just because of its sheer tankiness. The problem though is that it has very little DPS. So in a game where there is a lot of farming included, this game is very reliant on your farming speed. It takes a special kind of person who is dedicated to being utility in their guild to actually roll Sword and Shield. And they're still needed, yes. The amount of setback that you're gonna suffer by going this class is going to be pretty substantial, right, compared to like the faster grinding classes. So I would have to put it in B tier and probably teetering towards like C tier, unless they get buffed, right? Unless their damage gets buffed a little bit, but I highly doubt it at this stage in the game. A little bit carried when it comes to like sustain for grinding, but the damage kind of doesn't make up for it. For PvP, always useful with the utility, but don't expect to kill anybody as Sword and Shield either, right? Unless you like severely gear gap them, even then. And the next one is going to be, I know a lot of people like this concept of dual wielding like swords. A lot of Sword Art Online fans out there. But when it comes to dual blades, I'm probably gonna put them on like A tier. A tier, you know what? Or actually A tier or B tier. I would have to put them on there. And here's why. Hear me out on this one. So this one shifts a little bit, right? If you're free to play this class is like, it has good grinding capabilities. It has good sustain. It also has like one of the highest HP scaling in the game, so it's really good. It does really good DPS, but that's about it, right? So if you don't have the legendary skill for dual blades, it does become quite a bit of a struggle, especially in PvP, where you have the damage, but if you don't have the lockdown on PvP, people can just run away from you, right? So unless you're with a couple of people that have, let's say like a spear user or an impaler that has the CC that can help lock down a target for you, then yeah, sure, you'll be able to do your DPS, right? But not to the degree of somebody who can spend. If you're a whale and you can somehow get the legendary skill later on, like this class will probably jump to like S tier, but until then, you're gonna be down here in B tier, right? So just take note of that. Like it varies a little depending on your spending. So the next thing we have is Cleric. This one is gonna be a bit weird because here's the thing about Clerics, and I'll put Clerics as probably just because of how good they are and how crucial they are, especially in PvP scenarios. I know they suffer in terms of like DPS when it comes to PvE, and they definitely suffer a lot and the most in the early to mid game, right? Because like it takes a while for you to get your first heal, but once you do, PvE does become a lot easier for you, especially your questing, right? So I would probably put them in S tier. Some people might say like A tier, right? Because like leveling a cleric is pure agony, simply put. But I don't really want to dwell too much on the early to mid game, because if you keep playing the game, you're going to get the late game eventually. And really, that's going to be probably the best basis for ranking regarding your class, right? So I'd probably put Cleric at the lowest A tier, highest at the S tier. The S tier grinding is going to be a little bit on the downside, but honestly, if you're part of like an organized guild knows that they need clerics. So an organized guild will never shun you from a party when it comes to optimizing your farming as well, right? So even more so if you're wailing out on it, it's just a very effective class, and no guild with any type of organization or self-respect is going to shun any clerics out of their guild. Early and mid-game, bit of a struggle. Once you get your first 9 mil heal skill, and once you transfer your creed over from like intelligence to like spirit, and then when you face like up with all these bosses and you can just spam your heal manually, because unfortunately you can't auto it. So when you spam it manually, it just makes that experience a lot easier for you, right? Because you're tanky and you have heals on top of your already like potion spamming, so like the sustain is crazy on this one. The only downside is it's not auto, so maybe that might like put it down to A tier here, just because the heal isn't auto. But hopefully they have something that makes it auto eventually where you have like an HP threshold of when you can heal. And then I think when that time comes, I think Cleric is just going to be undisputably S tier, right? So yeah, it depends on you. Depends on like what you think about it. I personally have such a high respect for clerics that I'm gonna put them in S tier. And then next we have is mage, right? So or staff. Staff probably, if I have to choose here, staff is not like the fanciest, flashiest class, because the meta right now, people love skirmishers. A lot of skirmisher classes are being played right now, like Greatsword, Spear, for example. Not a lot of people love it. The thing about staff is like, I'm probably, because of like how much it kind of suffers when it comes to being squishy, I would probably have to put it on like C tier. This drastically changes, by the way, if you are a manual player. If you are a manual player as a staff, you have really good positioning. I know that's not common in games that have auto, because a lot of people love to auto. A lot of people who are used to autoing, and when it comes to PvP where you have to manually do it, you know, people are so focused on their skills, they can barely focus on their positioning. So a lot of people will put staff at C tier, but if you are able to do it manually, if you're able to like manually perform, manually grind, staff is an S tier grinder. I know for a fact that that's going to be a bit of a controversial topic to put like staff, you know, S tier. Because not a lot of people do it, or not a lot of people have the time to do it. But like when it comes to grinding, I think staff is definitely at the top, as long as you're manually grinding. If you're not, then it's gonna go down to like C tier or B tier, I would say, at the very like highest. A lot of people in KR love skirmishing. They love skirmishing classes. That kind of explains why staff is not as popular. I think as we get later and later into the game, what I've noticed when it comes to GVGs in Korea is that you'll have like big stacks kind of like converge into each other. It gets into like this melee where they just clash. And I think that this severe lack of staff users in Korea kind of doesn't make the clashes as effective as it should be. If you have like a certain number, let's say like, I don't know, maybe like 10, 20 staff users in a choke point like clash, let's say, they're able to just like nuke and bomb. I think for like mass PvP, I would probably put like staff under like A tier, not S tier in PvP, because of the fact that they're still squishy. So for staff, I would probably just now put them in B tier, just because, you know, this is a general tier list and not everybody's gonna be manually grinding. If you're gonna be manually grinding, you're gonna be S tier grinder, hands down. There's no debate. I don't think anybody can debate that, right? Overall, I would probably put staff into like B tier, bordering C tier, right? And then the next thing we have is Greatsword. So Greatsword, I'm gonna put Greatsword into A tier because it doesn't grind as fast, although it does grind quite well depending on your spending, right? Like I think grinding is like subjective, depending on like how much you've invested into the game, right? In a general sense, same spending progression, I think Greatsword is gonna fall behind when it comes to grinding. But the reason why I would put it in A tier still, and not B tier like the rest, is because of the fact that as a Greatsword user, you get access to your hard CC early, as opposed to like Spear, right? Spear gets like some form of like soft CC with slow, but like the hard CC that you get right away with Greatsword actually puts you in a really good position, even in the early game when it comes to PvP, right? You suffer a little bit with your grinding compared to like Spear, but when it comes to like PvP, which, you know, a lot of the times you have to defend yourself, you know, that's what puts it up at A tier. Also, another thing why Greatsword is also up here in A tier, bordering S tier, is the fact that it doesn't require you to have a legendary skill to function, like dual blades, for example, right? If you have Greatsword and you also have the legendary skill, which is like your 8-second immortality, it's just huge, right? It's not something that you need to function, but if you have it, it's really nice. So that's why I would probably, like, in an overall sense, I would probably put Greatsword A tier, bordering S tier, right? Just from a personal perspective and from a GBG perspective as well, when it comes to like, it can peel really well because of the hard CC, right? It can kill whoever's trying to hit your backline, but it can also engage. So I'll probably put Greatsword like A tier, bordering S tier, even though cleric grinding is not as good as well, but it's just, clerics are just more crucial, I would say, right? And the game is a lot about like GBGs, big fights and world bosses. And if you don't have clerics, I'm sorry, like, you're gonna lose the war of attrition. There's just no way, right? Somebody's chugging pots and getting healed at the same time, it's just not gonna happen for you, right? And the next thing we have is Spear. If I were to put Spear anywhere, I would probably put Spear at S tier. I think nobody can debate that Spear is like S tier. Number one, you don't need to be a whale to farm well. It's mid-range, right? It's range almost rivals, not as much, but almost rivals like bow. Develops to have good AoE later on. Takes quite a bit to ramp up because of like the nature of skills in this game, but it's gonna ramp up and it's gonna have an easier time even in the early game. The only thing is like early game when you don't have as much hard CC, definitely not as hard CC as like Greatsword. The PvP aspect kind of suffers a little bit. Like your first CC is you're slow basically, and then later on you get like your bound. It's like a 3-second bound, and it becomes like 4 seconds when you get your job change and get your proficiency passives, right? But until then, you know, early game PvP not as good as Greatsword, but does farm better than Greatsword, and scales really well into farming later on. In terms of like premier classes, I think that Spear is really up there. You don't need a legendary skill on it either, but if you do have the legendary skill, it is pretty badass. The legendary skill is basically like the suction AoE, and you don't need it as much, but you definitely would not complain if you had it, right? But you know, the general gist of the class is the fact that you can function even without your legendary, unlike dual sword, for example, right? And the next thing we have is dual dagger. Now, where would I put dual dagger? I think dual dagger. So here's the thing about dual dagger, right? Like if I might have to put it in like B tier, close to like A tier, right? In terms of like grind, it grinds better. It grinds better than like say Greatsword in general. But the problem with dagger is the fact that like you're an assassin, right? So if you're an assassin, you're trying to assassinate somebody. Let's say you're trying to assassinate somebody in the back line so that you can stealth out and then you can, you know, escape after like getting your target and killing them. The problem with dagger is that you're incredibly squishy, so you need to kill fast and you need to get out fast. If you don't have your legendary skill as a dagger user, you lose out on a ton of DPS, right? That's the problem with dagger. Grinds relatively well, grinds better than like, you know, let's say like Greatsword, but the issue with it is like unless you have that legendary skill later on, it's gonna be tough to get it. You kind of suffer. You don't want to be an assassin that can't assassinate, right? Because like, yeah, sure, you have stealth, you can get out because like stealth is OP, but at the same time, if you can't do the one job that you're supposed to do, you're not really much of an assassin, right? So that's why I would probably put like assassin in like B tier. The reason why I wouldn't put it in C tier before the legendary skill is because if you do get the legendary skill, you'd be up here in A tier. The last one we have right now, we don't have rapier yet because I don't have a lot of info on rapier and we don't know when it's gonna come in. But bow. So bow, I would have to. Here's the thing. This game is a lot about farming, and bow is early mid game especially. Is like one of like the best farm. Like right now, you guys probably notice it at this point, like prosperity. Like when it comes to like prosperity or something like that, if there's like a ton of like bow users in one spot, good luck getting the mob kill, right? But if you're a bow, that's not your problem, right? So the only thing with bow is the fact that in the late game, especially with how much like power creep there will be, and it's to be expected with MMORPGs, right? Much so with like pay to win MMORPGs, there's gonna be power creep, and the power creep when it comes to like spear users, Greatsword, like even like assassins with their legendary skill if they have it, like dual blades with their legendary skill if they have it, you're gonna get exploded, essentially, right? And the only reason that's like not putting you down here in B tier with the squishy like mage is the fact that your auto grinding is actually not that bad. But in terms of like PvE later on, when it comes to like being able to grind like higher level mobs, being able to like go to sleep and AFK when it comes to like higher level mobs, dual sword actually has more sustain than you. So as a bow user, as you get later into the game when mobs like tend to hit harder, you're gonna be sticking to like mobs around your level, right? Like your level, a level lower or something like that, so you don't have to use as much potions. That's when you're gonna be kind of feeling like the drop off a little with Archer. But on the plus side, you're not gonna feel a drop off on your damage. Like you're still gonna be really good DPS. It's just that, you know, you're gonna be outperformed a little bit when it comes to higher level efficient grinding. One of the reasons why I don't put it in B tier is for the fact that you don't need your legendary skill as well to function. Yes, you don't have an escape. Yes, it might be a little bit dangerous, but honestly, if you're a ranged DPS, you should be aware of the fact that you need to have good positioning. If you don't have good positioning, then you probably should not be playing a ranged DPS then, because like you're gonna get exploded, right, if you get caught out. So try to stick with your team. Start to stick with like a back line. Know when to kite back. Also know when to kite forward to your towards your front line if you have the enemy team diving your back line, because that's where it's going to be the safest at. Again, this is not like, as you can see, there's like some of these classes that are bordering like B tier or S tier. Like Greatsword, for example, is also bordering like S tier, right? Because if you spend on it, or if you have like the legendary skill, it'll boost it up to like S tier, for example, because it's just that good. With Archer though, I don't think it can really break the resistance towards like S tier, because of the fact that it has very clear and innate weaknesses, especially in the late game, and it becomes more and more apparent. But the reason why it doesn't go down to B tier is because of the fact that it is one of the best grinders in the game, even on auto. Alright, so basically that's it. Little Fatty tier list. If you guys have any comments, if you guys have any like arguments or violent reactions, you know, just leave it in the comments down below and we can have a discussion, right? Again, this is a subjective tier list, so if you don't agree on anything that's on here and how I've explained it, then feel free to make your own tier list or put it down in the comments below and we can have a discussion, a healthy discussion when it comes to scaling and how certain classes should be tiered.